Thanks very much, David. As I entered the atrium there, what came to mind was the phrase, I think intended rather disparagingly, "He was the future once," which I feel quite touched about, actually, because 24 years ago, I entered academia, actually, as in an IT role, and attended my first conferences of what was before CISG. I actually can't remember the name of it, which is probably just as well. I'm sure somebody does, but IUCC, thank you. And there was PCC, yeah, PC cubed, yeah, well done, Peter. Thanks. Okay, so we've established I'm past it. I've spent half of the 24 years intervening in IT, doing the sort of things you do, and a phenomenally important role in a university. At least I thought so at the time. I still think so. And the other half working, helping to run a university as the PVC for research, and over the last 6 years in a national role in higher education and research, a UK role in regard of the REF, and in other respects an English role. And I guess that's the opening point for the caveat to my talk, that I will mostly say things that are about England, because that's the only thing I've got an authority to talk about, apart indeed from the REF. And we've just had a green paper which is mostly about England, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. However, I actually was up in Scotland on Friday talking to Scottish planners who egged me on to talk about the green paper, actually on the day it was released, on the grounds that inevitably things that happen in England influence what happens north of the border and to the west and in Ireland, perhaps influence to ensure that the opposite happens, but more often I think there's a commonality of interest that we try and build on where possible. But there is that caveat there, and I'm not going to refer to that caveat every time I speak, so apologies to colleagues from Scotland. My only excuse is I'm an exile. So pleasure to be here, and I was reading the blurb for the conference, which I've got to say I found incredibly impressive. The conference will examine the realization that our services have had to evolve rapidly over the past few years to support an ever-changing set of environments and new business needs. The traditional corporate information systems portfolio is being reshaped. And then some good stuff, I think, about business drivers requiring our systems to be more integrated and more challenged, the sharing services agenda, and so on. I thought it was beautifully captured there. And what I thought when I read that was how difficult actually it is to achieve that, working in an environment where our organizations are, perhaps I could say tactfully, not highly managed organizations. So much has to be done by influence and consent. They're organizations which scrutinize, in my experience, very hard every bit of expenditure that is not on the core business of teaching, learning, and knowledge exchange. So therefore, you really have to work very, very hard for investment. A business which, compared with other business sectors, has not yet been influenced to the same extent by the digital revolution so much as others, I think. The core product that most of us offer is a face-to-face engagement between staff and student, and I think that's what students have made clear that they want, and I'll refer to that in the context of the Teaching Excellence Framework. And it's much more difficult to demonstrate productivity increases, and indeed to go digital, when the core business is so much dependent on face-to-face. So basically, you've got a pretty big challenge. The very nature of the business is a challenge. Getting investment is a challenge. The organization is a challenge. Are you feeling depressed? Or are you feeling challenged? Because I balance that by saying universities collectively in the UK have been a tremendous success over the last few years, very visibly in so many ways. It's my meat and drink to talk about the UK's research success. I'm not going to dwell on it now, but even the most casual analysis of any set of assessment results, whether they be citations, our own peer review, ref exercise, copious league tables, show that the UK is doing really well indeed, and for the level of investment we get, outstandingly well. We continue to attract students, and indeed staff, but we continue to attract students from all over the world in very considerable number, the second most popular destination, and the figures show that our students are pretty happy and satisfied students. Our employment rates are high. The outcomes, compared with non-graduates, are fabulous. What's not to like? And that has been delivered with, well, in my experience, quarter of a century of investment in technology to support the core business. Of course, there was a lot that happened before then, but I arrived at the start, really, of the PC and micro and personal computer revolution that significantly changed the way universities provided services to their students. And we've, in that period, I know it's going back a long way, we've automated things that were paper-based for years, and automated them sometimes with multiple attempts to get it right, because getting our institutions to articulate what they really want, well, I always found quite a challenge. I think it is quite a challenge. So you sometimes have to be iterative. So universities have been a great success. What's the problem? Is there anything to worry about? What's all this blurb about the need to go on changing? Well, one of the things I realised, and I was pig ignorant when I went into the national role, I just didn't understand enough of what the drivers were. Part of the pressure is if you are spending lots of government money, you're under continual pressure to reform whoever you are, and the government is never happy with being told that we're world leading. Why can't we be more world leading? I pick now, shall I be open about this? Yes, I think I'll be open about this. I'll pick management schools. Question from, let's just say, some big cheese in government. Why aren't our management schools better? Look at league tables. I think London Business School does incredibly well, second in some league tables. Why aren't they first? Was the question. Now, I feel a little bit frustrated that we're doing so well and we keep being urged to do better. On the other hand, that can't be entirely wrong, can it? And equally on the grounds of efficiency, although we have achieved a lot by using technology and the support of what we do, I think we're under considerable pressure to do more, partly because there's always a drive for efficiency in the expenditure of public funds, and partly because we can do some things better that way. So I really come to you saying we've done great, we're doing great, we can continue to do more that is great, but we've got to embrace that challenge. And my fundamental message is we understand that we address that challenge by understanding best what the drivers are. The drivers that come from outside our universities, which I've got to admit I did not understand so well when I was in a university, and I realised I'd done my job better if I had. And of course, very critically, the drivers that are inside our university. And we've got to cope with the fact that they can be different. Universities are autonomous institutions, and they will take their own decisions. Mostly it's good when universities align with national priorities, but occasionally universities want to go their own way, and it's right that we have a diversity of institutions among institutions, and they can choose to do so. So you've got to know what the drivers are externally and internally. And to that end, new challenges. We started talking about political, social and economic challenges when I was preparing for this talk. And I started, the three things I picked out to talk about were, and I will talk about, were efficiency, devolution, by which, since I'm in Scotland, I've got to say I don't really mean Scottish devolution, which I would probably get into trouble if I said anything much about. But I'm thinking more about the kind of devolution that's underway, one could say has happened in Scotland, is underway in England, where powers and money are being devolved from Whitehall to various kinds of regional body. And of course, what about universities as public bodies? Those were the areas I wanted to cover. But then last week, rather inconveniently, there was a green paper. I thought, well, you know, you can't ignore what is a mammoth in the room, not just an elephant in the room. So we better talk about that, although it's mostly, of course, England only. The green paper addresses, and I'm going to talk about some of these, and we'll take questions on any of them. I think it's important to have an interactive session. It addresses teaching quality and the teaching excellence framework. Lots of people will claim ownership of that name, but with the very first suggestions that we might do a framework, it was around the time I was still working hard on the REF, and I said, REF, TEF. Now, whether it was that stuck, or whether it's just a very obvious name in the scheme of things, it has stuck. Indeed, in the Minister's mind, it's a teaching excellence framework, although different in many respects from the research excellence framework. So, not surprisingly, I guess, teaching quality, social mobility, things that are perhaps not quite so obvious when you're running a university, but very obvious when you're thinking about it. A level playing field for new providers, welcoming new entrants, both as universities and as higher education institutions of one kind or another. And then reforming the HE architecture, which is code for doing things like merging my organisation, HEFCE, with OFA, and various things that might go on there. Trying to focus the bureaucracy more on the student interest and less on funding, which I think is an interesting perspective. And then reducing complexity and bureaucracy, which is sort of meat and drink to any government, and in this case is principally focused on the research agenda and looking at establishing some kind of more holistic research council. Research Fortnight today describes what some of the proposals might be, but the nurse report, which is due out shortly, will address this, and I can't comment because, of course, I don't know what's in the nurse report. Now, the green paper, and just so you know, this talk is not a complete coverage of what the political, social and economic challenges are for universities, because there's a whole lot of things that are not in. The PREVENT agenda, just let me do one of my tests. Hands up if you know what the PREVENT agenda is. Excellent, good, hard work, challenging, and something which universities really get into grips with, the absolute need to ensure that terrorism isn't encouraged by what happens at our university campuses, and something the government is very keen on. The Green Paper doesn't talk about that. It doesn't talk about postgraduate loans. It doesn't talk about part-time students, which are one of the most critical issues, I think, at the moment. But the Green Papers don't have to cover everything. It doesn't cover actually research beyond the organisation of the bodies, which is, shall we say, a slightly esoteric topic for most of the people who are actually doing the work. It doesn't cover knowledge exchange or university business relations, an area where our universities have performed brilliantly. It's just not something that it needs to cover. And the data is in the Green Paper, actually, briefly, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. So those, and there's probably other things that are not there. Of course, you need to know about them all. But I think we don't need to dwell on them all today. So before we come and talk about some of them, I want to get just a little bit of feedback from the audience. You've all been promoted to Vice-Chancellor. James knows the answer to this one, so I'm going to pick on you if nobody else comes up quickly, James. I'll just give you 30 seconds notice of that. You've all been promoted to Vice-Chancellor. You've been Vice-Chancellor for a wee while, 2 or 3 years, and you're about to talk about what has been successful in your university. And I want your personal choice of what you'd like to talk about. Assume you have been successful. Assume you've had money to play with, staff to play with. We're not in the constraints business here. What would you choose? What would you want to stand up and say? My university has. Now, are you going to take pity on James and is someone else going to go?
Somebody please do.
Go on. Just yell it out. I don't need a microphone for this. Stimulated regional growth. So the university in its place has regenerated local business, cultural centre, that sort of thing? Yeah? Great. Yeah. Anybody else?
Solved some of the big issues, global issues.
Yeah. So you've cured cancer, you've sorted climate change. I mean, you laugh, but the only way we'll get to these places is by people making significant breakthroughs, and nearly all of them happen in universities or in collaboration with universities. They are at the heart of transforming society. So yeah, I think that's right on. Anybody else? I'm not going to let you off the hook. Whatever happens, James, you're going to answer. Go on.
I was just going to suggest that we'd be pleased to educate all our students and get them into jobs.
Yeah, jobs for students. Yeah, graduate jobs.
Graduate jobs.
Graduate jobs. Yeah. Come on, James, your turn.
Well, when I answered this question last, you didn't agree with my answer.
You're still allowed to give it, though. Independent thought is allowed. James was on a session I did a few weeks ago, actually. Go on, James, shout it out.
No, our Vice-Chancellor would like to have all of our students taught in our own space. That's what he would say.
So that's about the, rather than taught where, you Bert Beck, so.
We hire space left, right, centre.
Okay, so that's essentially the university is a coherent geographical operation rather than being dispersed. Is that?
Ultimately, you boil down to being self-sufficient.
The university being self-sufficient, yeah. I mean, that's not a bad answer. The reason why I didn't like it last time is that I got a sequence of answers that were all about the university itself and very few answers that were about what the university would do for the world. But however, the first 3 were all the right answer. And since we have to, in order for universities to deliver those things that are outward looking, you obviously have to have a successful and sustainable institution. So perfectly reasonable, James, given that 3 people gave the outward-facing answer, for someone to give the... And I mean, there are other important things. If your staff were not motivated and to some extent happy, I realise there's always challenges, then you've got problems. If your students are in rebellion, that doesn't really help do any of those things. So there's a balance of external and internal things. So those are the success criteria. And I think we haven't actually talked terribly much about teaching and how you get the students to the point which Dave made. But I think in your position, the challenge is how do you facilitate that happening? And I'll say 1 or 2 things about that. In order to make the most of it, I think you do have to understand what those drivers are. And just to show you how difficult that is, I bumped into someone yesterday and he said, oh, it's a real pity that the Green paper said that's the last ref. I said, well, actually, when I read it, it said the next ref will be in 2021. Did it? I said, yeah, I said, it did, you know, and they're saying that the timescale may be extended, and indeed, in order to accommodate the current changes, it's essential that the timescales is extended to allow appropriate consultation, which you've got to have before you design a major exercise like that. So I think one of the challenges for all of us is to resist the mythologies that happen around higher education by reading the stuff. That can be a challenge. There's 105 pages in the Green Paper, 70 of which are active pages, and the rest is the consultation questions and bibliography and all that. It's hard work to read 70 pages, but actually it's perfectly possible. And it's also possible to read a fair analysis of what's going on in reputable places. The Times Higher is fairly reputable. I think it's reputable. Wonk HE. How many? Next test. How many of you read Wonk HE? Yeah. They're short articles. They're informed articles by good people. I don't write for them, so there's no self-interest here. Wonk HE, W-O-N-K-H-E. I'd encourage you to look there. You get a diversity of views on what's happening in higher education. So number one, in order to digest all this stuff and first of all, present the best arguments for investment that you can present, I think you've got to be able to talk about the drivers, and you'll discover that lots of people haven't understood the drivers, so that gives you a competitive advantage right at the start. You've also, of course, got to know, as I said a few minutes ago, what your university thinks, and I'm sure that you all hang on every word that your Vice-Chancellor says. And important, I think, that you understand what the key messages are. So, and of course, you've already nailed the third point, because focus on outcomes, and you've all described the sort of outcomes that you think your university, you'd like your university to have, and you ought to be arguing for those within your university. Now, I want to come back and talk about some of those topics. I'm going to talk about them for a short while and then stop and do a more discussion session during which the recorder will be off, and so we can have a straight discussion. Efficiency, first of all. The big challenge for efficiency in universities is the easiest way to make efficiency savings is to cut staff. Because roughly 60%, between 50 and 60% of most universities are staffing costs, and a whole load of what remains is service-related costs that's very difficult to prune down. Cutting staff is tricky because of the reasons I gave right at the start. Students like staff, they like people. And high staff-student, student-staff ratios, high student-staff ratios tend to give less enthusiastic National Student Survey results. And we want students to have every kind of support to come through to a good degree, as Dave said, and to a graduate outcome. So efficiency is difficult, but it's right plumb central in your area, and it's an absolutely compelling theme of the government's. Ian Diamond, who is the principal and whatever they're called, Vice-Chancellor, President of the University of Aberdeen, which is my own university, has been leading a UUK group on that, which has published reports. You should read the Diamond Report. It's not full of detailed insight on how one might make efficiency savings, but it is the key message to the government on how universities at a higher level are going to try and make savings. And therefore, if you want to align what you've got to offer, if you want to make the case for investment, it's jolly good to say, as it says in the Diamond Report, you can, and we can do that. Or we might work with you to do that. Good argument, in my view, for investment. The Diamond Report I think is key. I think it's also good to have a handle on comparative statistics of your organisation against other organisations, because you want to argue that you're efficient, assuming, of course, that you are efficient. And if you're not, it's something to think about. Universities are wont to do benchmarking exercises with people like Tribal, but through CISG, you're perfectly capable of doing it yourself, and it's a useful thing to do. So I'd like to say grab the efficiency stuff, because it will never go away. And indeed, I'm going back first thing tomorrow morning for an efficiency meeting with a prominent consulting organisation in the Treasury who are looking at various aspects of university efficiency. So I draw it to your attention as, in my view, a priority. When that blurb in the conference programme talks about new digital things you can do, efficiency has got to be a major justification. I'm going to come back to devolution. Universities as public bodies and the autonomy thing, I think, is made quite sharp by the recent developments in Scotland, and I read the story in the Scotsman today that suggested that the government might be moderating its views on how it engages with university governance. It's also an issue in Wales, where there's been a restructuring of the sector that's been government driven, and it's certainly an issue in England, where the government is wholly committed to the autonomy of universities, but nevertheless wants them to be responsible as organisations, as institutions in their place, and as representatives of the nation in the world. It wants them to do the very best, and indeed to tackle exactly those priorities, some of them research, some of them knowledge exchange, that the government thinks is important. This has been a continuing theme, and one reason why, despite it appearing tough in universities financially over the last 5 or 6 years, one reason why universities have been the best funded public institutions, by which I mean institutions in receipt of public funds, in the country. The various arrangements with fees, and although not tuition fees in Scotland, the steps that the government has taken to support universities have protected universities from income cuts, and indeed universities have protected themselves by winning private income more than anyone else. Even the health service has had a tougher time, and if you engage with any other part of the public sector, you know how they're having a very tough time. And universities, yes, we're under pressure, but we've done well. Now, why is that? It's because the government thinks that universities are fundamental to growth and now to improved productivity, which is one of our big issues in this country. The government have protected research income and ensured that there was teaching funding, actually more funding per student than we've had before, and universities have responded. You can see greater investment in universities from business, a significant year-on-year increase during a period when GDP dropped. The faith that the government placed in universities to be at the heart of regional and national growth, I believe, has been justified. But nevertheless, we're only part of the way there in recovering the damage that happened through the global financial crisis. So the government thinks that universities are the answer, and to do that, we have to engage with national priorities and accept the fact that we get considerable amounts of public funding, while still, as autonomous institutions, taking decisions about how to invest and new business to do, and those decisions made partly so that the university continues to be successful, but critically so that university partners are successful. The government, whether it be in Edinburgh or Whitehall or Cardiff or Belfast, cannot understand at a granular level the issues faced by businesses, the social and cultural sector, that universities, because there's over 150 of them, can understand, because they just are much closer typically to their local partners, but also in the case of many universities, to national partners. The senior staff and key academics can just know the people in business with the problems, in the cultural sector who want to work and partner with universities. The government can't manage that top down, and it shouldn't do so either. It's for the government to set high-level priorities, which they do. It's for us to engage with them, and it's for us to understand the priorities of our partners and ensure that university resources, partly publicly funded, are targeted to that. So the answer from the back about universities in their place, I believe, is happening. I believe it needs to happen more if our country is to regain its financial position. And I think there is no institution other than universities that is equipped to do this to the same scale that we are. Real challenge for universities. So whenever anybody takes something as an attack on autonomy, my line is, how much freedom have universities got to, yes, accept public money, but deploy it in a way that's driven both by national priority and by what I will call as a code local priority, although it's a bit more complex than that. And that's, I'll say a bit more about devolution in a moment, but it's become very explicit through the devolution agenda. We don't, one option of course would be to devolve higher education funding to regional bodies, and then you'd be driven very much by local priorities. That's on the whole not happening at the moment. There are some elements that do get spent regionally, and it places universities really in the key place of taking wise decisions about what they do. So, efficiency, universities as public bodies feeding into local place. What about the most recent things in the white paper? I'm going to say nothing about social mobility because I don't think there's actually any particular new thrust in the Green Paper, but there is an encouragement to persist and to accelerate the rate with which those from disadvantaged backgrounds go to university. Indeed, probably an encouragement to at least double the rate of increase in year on year in the numbers going. We really had a problem for, even after tackling the social mobility problem for about 10 years, when not a lot happened. We widened participation, but actually it just led to more people going from the same social groups as went before. In the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm talking about English figures now, because I'm not sharp enough on the Scottish figures. In the last 6 years, we have increased the numbers going. People with potential to benefit from higher education, but whose prior experience and attainment doesn't fit with standard methods for university entry. Of course, the best predictor of academic success is A-levels. That's just the way it is. But we're not interested in the average person. We're interested in looking at individuals and the potential they have that can be developed by going to university. What the white paper says is we've only started to eat away at that problem. And I absolutely believe that. I think any way in which we can provide additional support, particularly to people who come so that they from difficult backgrounds, so that they can catch up and end with a good degree and great employment outcomes, but also partly to encourage those who perhaps don't have the aspiration to go to university to do so. And that's really a full-on engagement of universities with community bodies, schools obviously, but not just that, which I think universities have got to really stick at. So I don't know that we're taking a right turn on any approaches, but really something that any of us with any shred of social justice in our heart would want to see every student with the potential to benefit getting the opportunity to do so. Can I come to teaching quality and the TEF and talk a little bit about how you might discuss this in your institutions? There are essentially 2 lines running at the moment. One line, which the government has encapsulated well, is that although many of our students have fantastic experiences and great outcomes, that experience is not uniform. There are areas where students don't do as well as you think they should. Certainly the government doesn't think they should. And there's loads and loads of anecdotal comment about things like limited contact hours, that a persistent set of comments from Anthony Selden, notably, that students don't get sufficient support. And basically, we just need to be better with our teaching. That's one line, and as someone who's worked in a university, I think it's impossible to pretend that all of our teaching is truly excellent or meets the aspirations we ourselves would have. And the government also point out that universities are driven very much by the esteem there is in excellent research, and of course I'm the culprit in that respect for running a research excellence framework that indeed does identify excellence, actually identifies areas that are not quite so good as well, but perhaps not the same esteem for those whose career focus is on teaching. I'm not sure that's a universal problem, but it certainly is something I find easy to sympathise with and understand. There's an alternative line running in the press at the moment that what's the problem, basically, and looking on headline statistics that do look very good. Between 75 and 80% of students are satisfied with their university experience, which in any, you can say 20 to 25% aren't, but in a service-oriented culture where students don't just buy a service but have to engage as a partnership with their university in their learning, I think that's a high figure. Of course, some of the other NSS figures, other than the overall satisfaction, are not so great. But the headline statistics are good. Graduate employment is good, been a bit down during the recession, but still good. Wage and salary outcomes are good. What's the problem? I think in general it never helps to tell the government when they say there's a problem that there isn't a problem. And I think that some of the criticisms they make, anybody with detailed experience can see there's something in it. How that gets tackled, I think, is the issue for the moment. The government's proposed a teaching excellence framework, and I think there's a lot in that to get to grips with. There's lots and lots to commend. There's lots to comment on where people may see a better way of doing it. I think the discussion in universities, which you should be taking part in, is how do we address this? I don't think that avoiding the issue is the way to tackle the problem, as some are doing, say, in the press. I think trying to identify where you can make advances, how you could use a teaching excellence framework, not to come out with a glorious result, but actually to boost the quality of teaching in your institution. Now, when I worked in IT, I've got to be honest, it took me a long time to get in to understanding what the teaching process was about, other, of course, than having been a student some 20 or so years before I was in a university. But whenever anybody, whether politician, bureaucrat like me, or academic, starts talking about how things were in their day, I get a bit twitchy because we have changed tremendously. And I tried to engage more with students when I was at university to understand the way they saw the problem. And inevitably, of course, you talk to academics a fair bit. So I'd encourage you to understand, and again, it's in the Green Paper, but it's also in the press, what the issues are around teaching, and to understand what the debate is in your institution. We cannot, in my view, be left off the pace on this. It's absolutely essential to UK higher education that it demonstrates it's taking up the challenge, and to demonstrate bluntly that we care about every student and doing our best for them. So that's what I want to say about teaching quality. I want to now come to data. Let's do another test. I bet you this is the only man. If I said to you, what was Mackay? See, I knew we'd get a response. How many of you would say, oh yes, I could talk coherently about that for at least 15 seconds? No. Peter could, couldn't you? Yeah. I don't probably know what, now that what's he going on about? Well, in fact, exactly when I entered the sector in 1991, we were just at the start of an exercise to design a blueprint for the way that administrative services work in universities, and actually commission 4 different suppliers to provide complete answers to everything that a university did in its administration. So do we now have 4 different systems with complete answers to UK higher education administration? Well, we don't. It ran into a few problems, mainly in specifying actually what was needed, in my view, but a lot more happened. The thing is that we haven't significantly challenged the underlying data structures, as opposed to admin processes, since those days. And some people out there have spotted that the world has changed in the last quarter century, and they ask, why aren't you looking at your data structures and trying to address the issues? Now, Andy Ewell is coming to talk to you about this, and he'll talk more eloquently in far more detail than I intend to now. I'm not pinching his slot, but I did tell him I was coming, and I think what Andy and his team, who funded actually by us and the partner funding bodies, has done is to create an opportunity to address this issue and to redefine our data structures so that they're fit for the next quarter century, and so that we can build new administrative systems based on robust data rather than on data structures that just don't serve today's purposes. I think there's an issue, there's time to look now at the governance and oversight of our data structures, at the standard data definitions, to rationalize the data collections we do, and there can be no more 10th point in a year, in my experience anyway, trying to get your, I'm not supposed to swear, I'm being recorded, your HESA collection, your HESA submission done, and it comes back with errors, and you redo it, and it comes back with errors again. Has anybody had that experience, or was it just my institution that had problems with it? So the rationalization of data collections, including why are we doing periodic data collections when the rest of the world seems to have moved to live data? James is shaking his head here, he's getting worried there. We're into dangerous territory. And where is our data capability? There is an opportunity to address this. Andy has got, and indeed HESA through their project, which is now called Data Futures, I think it was cached, but it's now called Data Futures, are looking at how we might address these problems. We've, in my view, got to deal with them. There's a sort of 4-year window to get it right. It's not, we've got to do it tomorrow. The choice is, it's too difficult to alter the JAX codes when JAX codes are not fit for purpose. We've got to grab the opportunity. Now, getting it right, I'm not ducking, this is not a trivial problem, but I think head in the sand, just as it won't do when addressing the issues there are around teaching quality, won't do, in my view, with data. And if we do stick head in the sand, we're probably setting ourselves back by a high number of years. It won't be popular because it's hard. I mean, it's hard work. I mean, very hard work to replace any admin system. I have done several of them. It's a very big challenge, and changing underlying data structures with that is very, very hard work. There is, in my view, a wonderful opportunity, and I urge you to engage with Andy, to challenge him, because this is not about just going along with someone that's delivered on tablets of stone. That, in my view, was one of the deficiencies of the Mac-I system that I referred to from many years ago. You've got to have stuff that is fit for all of your purposes. Equally, we've got to be prepared to trim a bit on what we do, because you can't, I think, design a new set of data structures that deal with every peculiarity in every institution. That's not popular often with colleagues in other admin departments who want to get on with the job rather than replacing systems. I could not feel stronger that this is an opportunity to be grabbed, and really pleased that in Andy and his partners in HESA, we've got the people who are capable of doing that, but it depends on you. And I really urge you to take this one and run with it. It was important enough to be in the white paper, green paper, which is one reason why I'm whittering on about it. Page 39 has a whole section entitled Data. The availability of high-quality data and information underpins public policy development. And actually, although it's not very obvious, there's something sharp in there. We want to explore, the government say, whether to establish a power to require bodies providing a service connected with the provision of higher education to provide relevant data. What they're saying is, in the new big data world, we don't think higher education is ready, and if we can't persuade them to grab this, perhaps we need the power to knock heads together. Now, they're not saying they're going to do that. I think they're exploring that, and there's a consultation question precisely about that. What potential benefits for decision and policy making in relation to improving access might arise from additional data being available? This is core to your activity. And that's why I'm labouring the point considerably. You should all at least read page 39. It is actually only one page, and the bit that matters before the questions is only half a page. You should all read it, and you should be able to quote it in your institutions, and you should say, what's our position on this? And I think that you should be coming away from the session with Andy and any subsequent sessions, because you can only achieve so much in one session here, ready to argue the case and provide informed criticism where things could be done better. But Andy hasn't made it all up. It's based on people like you contributing. So I want to dwell on that. Well, I think that's enough of the discussion about devolution, about universities as public bodies, about teaching quality, and about data. I think those are the things I want to talk about. What about it then? Are you up for it? Are you willing to engage with just knowing a bit more than many of the people in your university because you're reading the stuff? Are you willing to engage within your university so that you can make a better case for investment based on delivering these outcomes that the government is saying is desirable? Are you willing to say yes, and you understand some of the local drivers or partner drivers, because they're not all local for university, and your admin services are there to deliver for them? The only way that UK universities can continue to be as successful as I think they are is if the key people are fully on board. I wasted an awful lot of years of my life if you are not key people, because I spent years doing it. I think you're key to the transformation of your universities into mid-21st century organisations which continue to be jewels in the national crown. If you duck this choice, we will just have less these opportunities. We will have less efficient universities, less fit for purpose. And there is nobody else with the underlying knowledge, skills and experience to input into the kind of questions I've posed today. It's up to you. It's a great opportunity. Could you please get on with it? Thanks very much. Now the microphones are off, the recording's off. Recording off.